Okay, so we've all heard the slogan a million times. Data is the new oil. But let's be real. What does that actually mean for a business? Because, we all nod our heads and say, yep, data is a super valuable asset. But the truth? The way most companies are actually managing their data, well, it's just plain broke.
And hey, this isn't some new idea. The business guru Tom Peters was shouting this from the rooftops way back in 2001. Think about that for a second. Over 2 decades ago. And the stakes he laid out are incredibly high. Getting your data strategy right isn't just a nice-to-have thing for a little extra efficiency. No, he said it's about survival. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack all of that. We'll start with the whole data as a corporate asset idea. Then we'll dig into what I call the illusion of value. From there, we'll talk about a smarter governance model. And finally, we'll get to the good stuff, unlocking your data's potential.
All right, let's dive into part 1, data as a corporate asset. This is pretty much the accepted wisdom, the foundation for almost every data strategy you see out there.
So the whole data as asset concept is, on the surface, pretty simple. It just means that the data your company creates or buys has actual economic value. Just like a building or a patent. And if it's an asset, well, you've got to govern it, right? You have to secure it, document it, make sure it's high quality, and of course, show that it's giving you a return on investment. It all makes perfect sense. Or does it?
Okay, part 2, the illusion of value. This is where things get really interesting. Because if that asset model is so perfect, why does it so often just fail? Why does it create this illusion of value instead of the real deal?
I mean, this is the question that drives data leaders absolutely crazy. And maybe it sounds familiar to you. You spend a ton of money, millions even, on all these fancy tools and processes for data governance. And for what? It just feels like you're building a bunch of bureaucracy with no real impact. The asset is still locked up somewhere, and its value feels more like a catchy slogan than something tangible. So what gives? Well, it turns out the problem is in our heads. Our thinking gets totally clouded by 3 really powerful biases. First, you've got the current use case bias. That's where we only see value in data that's already powering a report or a KPI. If it's not in use right now, we think it's worthless. Second, there's the maturity bias. This is the classic you don't know what you don't know problem, creating huge blind spots. And third, there's perception bias. This one's big. We look at stuff like system logs and just dismiss it as technical data, not real business data, completely missing its potential. So these biases aren't just, abstract concepts from a textbook. They have very real, very costly consequences. Let's make this concrete. What does this failure actually look like in the real world? To understand this, I want you to think of your company as an oil extraction station. Simple enough, right? Your job is to pull valuable stuff out of the ground. But here's the catch. Your station has a huge problem. It's really, really short-sighted, and all the teams are working in their own little silos. So here's how this fragmented rig operates. You've got your extraction team. Think of them as your BI folks. Their job is to pull up the known products, the oil and the gas. And their blind spot? They totally ignore every other substance that comes up with it. They just toss it aside. Then you have the exploration team. These are your data scientists, your innovators. Their job is to find new deposits. But they're only looking for more oil and gas. Why? Because that's the only stuff the extraction team ever tells them about. They are completely dependent on a super narrow view of the world, creating massive blind spots. A system like that pretty much guarantees you're going to miss out on finding new types of value. So how do we fix it? Well, this brings us to part 3, a smarter governance model. The good news is we don't have to tear everything down and start over. We just need a smarter, more practical approach. Let's call it gradual governance. So this approach is basically a 2-part solution. First, we keep what's already working, the business glossary. That's fantastic for defining the data we already know and use in our reports and KPIs. But, and this is the game changer, we add a totally new layer, an exhaustive data catalog. The job of this catalog is simple but profound. Inventory everything. All of your data, whether it's being used today or not. You see, it fundamentally shifts the question. We stop asking, what is this data used for? And we start with a much, much more powerful question.
What data do we have? Period. And that simple shift is what finally lets us move to part 4, unlocking your data's potential. This is how we go from a meaningless slogan to a real, actionable strategy.
So let's go back to our oil rig one last time. In this new, smarter, integrated system, the extraction team is still pumping out the oil and gas. That's their core job. But now they're also taking samples of everything else they pull up and handing it over to the exploration team. This creates an amazing continuous feedback loop for discovery. All of a sudden, the explorers can look for completely new kinds of value. Maybe there's lithium in that sludge, or rare earth minerals. Who knows? The possibilities are wide open. And by the way, this isn't just a metaphor. This is literally how modern resource companies operate. They know the value is often in what you weren't originally looking for.
So, what do you actually get from all this? It boils down to 2 huge, game-changing benefits. First, a real measure of use. For the first time ever, you can actually see what percentage of your total data you're using. You know not just what assets you have, but how much is just sitting there untapped. And second, you get the promotion of exploration. You're finally giving your analysts and data scientists a complete map of the entire territory so they can go out and be real explorers, hunting for that next big high-value use case. This completely flips the script. Data is no longer just some passive resource that you have to lock down and manage. It becomes an active frontier that you can constantly explore. So treating data as an asset isn't just about protecting it anymore. It's about having a system to systematically discover all the value it holds. Which brings us to the final and most important question, the one you should be asking yourself. What hidden gems are just sitting there, waiting to be discovered in your company's data field?